Welcome to Hale and Hearty Horses. I'm Dr. Rebecca and I'm your host. Equine nutrition is a huge topic, and if you've ever tried to sort through the advice, the opinions, and marketing out there, you know how overwhelming it can be. There's a lot of confusion and even conflicting information, and it can be hard to know what's truly right for your horse. In this episode, I want to bring some clarity to this subject. While a deep, full dive into equine nutrition could easily take a year or more, today we're going to focus on one critical component that often gets overlooked. Today's critical component is the equine microbiome. Understanding your horse's gut health and the inner ecosystem of their digestive tract can completely shift how you think about feeding, about supplementation, and long-term care. So let's take a closer look at the equine biome and why it may be the most important factor influencing your future decisions about your horse's diet. First, let's define the microbiome. In simple terms, the microbiome is a community of trillions of microorganisms. That means bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and even viruses that live within or on the equine's body, so in or on your horse's body. It is throughout the digestive tract, and that's where we're going to be talking about it today, with various amounts and different species depending on the area that we discuss. The microbial diversity is the lowest in the stomach area, increases in the small intestine, but is actually the most diverse in both numbers and in diversity of different species in the hindgut of your horse. These microbes aren't just along for the ride, they're actually super important and essential because they break down fiber, they produce vitamins, they support the immune system, and they actually influence mood and behavior. Think of the microbiome as the digestive system's ecosystem, a delicate balance that affects everything from nutrient absorption to inflammation levels. And here's the kicker. When the microbiome community is disrupted, whether that be from stress, antibiotics, poor diet, or even ulcers, the horse's whole health can start to unravel. That's why protecting and supporting the microbiome is one of the most powerful things we can do for overall wellness, and why this is our first topic when discussing holistic nutrition. Before we get deeper into this subject, let's have a brief overview of the equine digestive tract. The horse's digestive tract, which can be divided into three main regions: the gastric region, the small intestine, and the hindgut. Understanding each of these regions and how they function can completely change the way you approach feeding, supplementation, and overall health. So the first region is the gastric region. The horse's stomach is relatively small, only holding about 2 to 4 gallons, and is designed for very frequent small meals, not large and infrequent ones. The stomach initiates digestion by mixing food with acids and enzymes, particularly breaking down proteins. However, very little absorption happens here. It's mainly a preparatory stage for more complex digestion that follows. In the wild, horses graze up to 18 hours a day, so their stomachs constantly produce gastric acid. This means if a horse goes too long without eating, this acid can actually cause irritation, leading to issues like gastric ulcers. We will do a whole podcast on ulcers in the upcoming weeks because that's a really important subject also, but today we're just going to stick to the microbiome. Yes, there are even microbiomes in the stomach, but in far fewer numbers than there are in the hindgut. That's because the stomach's acid environment isn't very hospitable. However, some acid-tolerant microbes do exist, and they can still play a role in early digestion and even protect against pathogenic organisms. After the stomach, food enters the small intestine, which is about 70 feet long and is where the majority of the nutrient absorption actually takes place, especially of proteins, fats, sugars, vitamins, and minerals. In the horse's digestive tract, the small intestine area is made up of 3 segments: the duodenum, which is the first section, which receives partially digested food from the stomach and mixes it with bile and pancreatic enzymes. The second section is the jejunum, and that is the middle and the longest portion where most nutrient absorption occurs. The ileum, the final section, which connects to the cecum, which is the beginning of the hindgut, continues nutrient absorption. Together, the small intestine of the horse is approximately 50 to 70 feet long, about 15 to 21 meters, and holds 10 to 12 gallons of material. It's where digestion of proteins, simple sugars, carbohydrates, and fats primarily occur before the feed moves into the hindgut for fermentation. The small intestine does contain microbes, though again in smaller proportions. The environment here is less acidic than the stomach, but still not ideal for flourishing microbiome populations. The microbiota in this region assists with early digestion, including enzyme production and modulation of the immune system. One important thing to know is that the small intestine digests non-structural carbohydrates like simple sugars and starches. And we'll contrast that to the hindgut in a moment. When we talk about simple sugars and starches, here's the catch. Horses aren't really built to handle large amounts of that kind of food. In fact, horses consuming large amounts of what we call NSCs, non-structural carbohydrates, can actually have many problems, including metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, PPID, or what we call Cushing's disease, laminitis issues, colic, hindgut acidosis. It can also contribute to things like OCD and DOD, developmental diseases, and of course can actually influence their behavior and their personality. We go on to the third section, which is the hindgut, which includes the cecum, the small colon, and the large colon. These are a massive fermentation chamber that's home to billions of microbes. That's where most of this digestive microbiome actually exists. This is also where horses digest fiber, like hay, pasture, grasses, and beet pulp, and this is mostly done through microbial fermentation. These microbes are crucial. They break down fibrous material into what we call VFAs, which are volatile fatty acids, which the horse absorbs as a primary energy source. But that's not all. The hindgut microbiome also plays a critical role in immune function, inflammation regulation, nutrient synthesis like vitamin B and vitamin K, protecting against harmful pathogens, and even can affect behavior and mood through the gut-brain axis. But here's another catch. The microbiome population is extremely delicate. It thrives on consistency. That means consistent forage, consistent feeding times, and minimal stress. Sudden diet changes, overuse of starches and sugars, antibiotics, dewormers, stress, and even travel can disrupt the microbiome balance, leading to a cascade of health issues like colic, laminitis, weight loss, poor coat, behavioral issues, and immune dysfunction. So we've gone over all this, but why does it really matter? Like, you can pick up any textbook and find this information. And you can even read textbooks that really cover the digestive system all the way from the mouth to the teeth and on through. But what we really want to understand today is that if we can understand where digestion happens and where the microbes live, then you can make informed decisions about what you're feeding your horse, how you're feeding your horse, and how you can support their health through looking at this digestive system through the lens of the microbiome. For example, if your horse's diet lacks adequate forage, the microbes in the hindgut actually starve. If you're feeding too much starch, it can bypass digestion in the small intestine and actually ferment in the hindgut, causing acidosis, gas, and microbiome die-off. If you're changing hay or feed too quickly, the microbiome doesn't have time to adapt. If you're not supporting the microbiome diversity, your horse may not be absorbing nutrients efficiently or effectively, even if the diet looks great on paper. So the microbiome has like this huge impact on the horse's ability to digest their food and to absorb the nutrients out of it. And really looking at the 3 areas that the microbes are most prevalent, and especially looking at hindgut digestion and how we can support that, has a huge impact on your horse's health. So the takeaway to all of this is that your horse isn't just digesting food. They're hosting this microbiome, this whole entire ecosystem in their gut. And that ecosystem, especially in the hindgut, is absolutely essential to their overall health. Your horse's diet needs to be tailored to how their digestive system works, not just what's convenient or popular in the moment, not just what's marketed the best. And that's why understanding the equine biome, especially the hindgut microbiome, is so important. When we support the gut, we support the whole horse. So let's unpack this a little bit deeper by introducing the concept of leaky gut, and particularly its connection to the microbiome. Now, leaky gut might sound like a buzzword, but it's based on real physiological processes known as increased intestinal permeability. In a healthy digestive system, the epithelial lining of the gut acts like a selective barrier at the microscopic level down to 1 cell thick. It allows the nutrients to pass through into the bloodstream, but it keeps out large, undigested food particles, toxins, and harmful microbes. But when that lining becomes damaged or inflamed, the tight junctions between the individual cells of the digestive tract start to loosen. This layer is 1 epithelial cell thick, and the integrity of the cells to hold the line and to keep themselves connected to each other is super important. The ability for the cells to stay connected to one another is by what we call these tight junctions. Tight junctions are a complex network of transmembrane proteins and cytoplasmic scaffolding proteins. These are structures that form a seal-like connection between adjacent epithelial cells, and these cells are lining the gut. They play a crucial role in maintaining the intestinal barrier. They control the substances that can or cannot pass through between the spaces of the cells. So why are these tight junctions so important in the horse? Well, for one, they prevent harmful substances, toxins, and pathogens from leaking from the gut into the bloodstream. They also maintain the selective permeability to allow nutrient absorption while keeping the barrier intact. So any dysfunction or disruption of the tight junctions can lead to what we call leaky gut, which is the creation of tiny openings that allow substances that shouldn't pass into the bloodstream, like bacteria, endotoxins, proteins, and waste products, to leak through. And that's where the trouble starts, which is implicated in various equine digestive disorders, inflammation, and even systemic health issues. So what actually causes this and how can we prevent it? There's actually no single one cause, but rather a combination of causes, a combination of stressors that disrupt the microbiome and irritate the intestinal lining. Some of the common contributors include this high-starch, high-sugar diets, especially grain-heavy feeds, any abrupt changes in their feeding regimen, either in what they get or the amounts that they get or the frequency that they get it, any kind of chronic stress, whether that be from travel, competition, even herd dynamic changes, NSAID overuse or abuse. NSAIDs are non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs like bute and banamine. Even frequent deworming or chemicals introduced into the digestive system can play a role, as can some medications like antibiotics can greatly affect the microbiome. Of course, any poor quality of food or forage or hay can disrupt the microbiome. And of course, ulcers and chronic inflammation from this source or other sources can also affect the microbiome. and in turn affect leaky gut or intestinal permeability. Each of these can compromise the integrity of the gut wall, disrupt microbial balance, and create a cycle of inflammation and dysbiosis. So how does the body know, hey, let's let this through, but let's not let this other part through, this other substance through? So these tight junctions are not just a physical barrier, but they are selectively permeable, meaning they control what products or what substances can actually sneak by. Here's the cool part. Most nutrients actually pass through the cells themselves, not between them. When we talked about the tight junctionings actually loosening up, we're talking about between the cells. But most nutrients are actually absorbed because they go through the cells, not between the cells. So the epithelial cells actually have these specialized transport proteins and channels designed to recognize and shuttle specific molecules across the cell. This includes things like glucose, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals, and they allow them to pass through the cell and into the bloodstream. Some nutrients move more passively. They're just flowing from a high concentration to a low concentration. Others require energy to actually be transported, especially when the body needs to absorb something even when it's in low concentration. There's also a tiny bit of traffic between the cells. These small ions of water can slip through the tight junctions, but this passage is carefully regulated so that harmful substances can't leak through. On top of all of that, the gut lining is covered with mucus, which acts like this extra shield, trapping unwanted particles and helping the immune system monitor for invaders. So in summary, your horse's gut is a finely tuned selective filter using tight junctions, transport proteins, mucus, and immune defenses to make sure the right nutrients get in and the bad stuff stays out. It's pretty amazing, actually, how complicated but how well the gut and the microbiome work together to help the horse utilize the correct feeds and help the horse gain all the nutrients out of it, and then how good the body is at transporting those nutrients across the cell, through the cell, into the bloodstream so the horse can utilize it throughout their body. Understanding this whole concept really helps us appreciate how critical good diet, stress reduction, and gut health are to keeping our horses thriving. Okay, so let's talk about the immune system connection and why that's so important and how that's connected to gut health, because all of these layers kind of fit together, and it's kind of hard to separate them and not talk about one or the other without talking about all of them together, because so much of the horse's immune system is actually in their gut, and how we control their diet can greatly influence their immune system as well, especially when it comes to systemic inflammation or immune dysfunction. So let's talk about the immune system connection and why gut health is so important. So we talked about the epithelial cells of the digestive tract as a selective filter. So let's now look at this other superhero role that the gut plays, and that's a major part of the horse's immune system. Did you know that the gut houses a massive portion of your horse's immune defense? It's true. The gut-associated lymphoid tissue, which is called GALT, or GALT for short, is like a frontline army stationed right where the outside of the world meets the inside of the body. So your horse consumes something, it goes into the body, and this immune system in the gut is like the first defense, the front lines of making sure that there is nothing that's passing into the body that shouldn't. This GALT is a specialized part of the horse's immune system that actually lives within the lining of the digestive tract. And it's sort of like a surveillance headquarters in the gut, constantly looking for pathogens, allergens, or anything that doesn't belong. In fact, up to 70 to 80% of the horse's immune system is actually concentrated here. So what does it do? Its job is to maintain a delicate balance between immune tolerance and immune defense. Number one, it constantly monitors all the substances that pass through the digestive tract, food particles, microbes, toxins, etc., and decides which ones are harmless and which ones are threats. It also learns to recognize friendly microbes like gut bacteria and harmless food proteins so that the immune system doesn't overreact to the good guys. However, when a harmful bacteria or virus is detected, the immune system is activated as a local immune response, calling in immune cells and producing macrophages to neutralize the threat. So, how is it affected by leaky gut? When the intestinal barrier becomes compromised, say due to stress or NSAIDs, high-starch diets, or chronic inflammation, substances that actually should stay in the gut actually slip through into the bloodstream. This is all that we just covered above. As these pass into the bloodstream, the gut responds, but it over-responds. It triggers this chronic low-grade inflammation, and sometimes even an autoimmune type reaction. So basically what's happening is your horse gets this intestinal permeability and things are sneaking into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. Of course, your horse's immune system immediately says, oh my gosh, that shouldn't be here. We need to go attack it, send out the macrophages, send out the B cells, develop an immune response to it. The problem is if it continues to happen day after day after day, that just keeps the horse's immune system spiked high all the time. It actually gets overstimulated. And so you get this like chronic low-grade inflammation that just permeates through the entire system and then actually ends up permeating through the entire body. Because what happens, you have this local response, but the longer that goes on, then that gets a humoral response and the humoral immune system kicks in. This is why leaky gut is such a big concern. It overstimulates the gut, and then it leads to systemic issues that go far beyond just digestion. So we mentioned this humoral immune system. Well, that's the branch of the immune system that relies on antibodies. So you've probably seen videos of these like Y-shaped proteins floating around in the bloodstream. And what they do is they go in and identify and neutralize invaders. And they actually set up a long-term system to be able to recognize those invaders in the future. So unlike the immune cells that actually physically attack the pathogens, the humoral immunity works more like a radar and missile system that it's tagging threats for destruction instead of neutralizing them directly. So the antibody attaches and then the macrophages knows that's the substance that they should attack. With a horse with a really strong gut lining and there's no permeability, most of the action stays just right inside the digestive tract. That protective barrier, those tight junctions, keeps the bacteria, the toxin, and the undigested food particles where it belongs, actually in the gut. But when the lining becomes damaged, like we talked before, multiple times due to stress, medication, poor diet, parasites, or even chronic inflammation from other sources, we end up with this increased intestinal permeability, and that's what we call the leaky gut. When that happens, things that should never enter the bloodstream, like bits of feed protein or bacterial fragments or microbial toxins, they actually begin to leak through. And this is where the immune system actually kicks in, and the humoral immune system has a response. Your horse's immune system now sees these escaped foreign particles as actually invaders. And this can cause a wave of antibody production, especially IgG, which circulates in the blood, and IgA, which works at the mucosal surface. Antibodies bind to these foreign-looking particles and form what's called an immune complex. These complexes can then travel through the bloodstream, where they may be cleared out, or in chronic cases where they lodge into tissues and they trigger inflammation far away from the gut. That's how leaking gut can lead to things like joint stiffness, skin reactions, or behavioral changes, even when the digestion seems fine. There's no outward indication that the digestive system is suffering, but you start to get these other clues that something's not quite right. And here's the kicker, because the immune system is constantly firing off antibodies to deal with this flood of foreign material, it can actually become hypersensitive or dysregulated, resulting in high inflammatory conditions throughout the whole body unnecessarily. Over time, this can contribute to food sensitivities, poor nutrient absorption, and even autoimmune-like reactions. So, to sum it up, the humoral immune system is actually just doing its job. It sees a threat, it's producing the antibodies, and it's trying to clean up the mess. But the gut barrier, if it's never repaired, this response just keeps happening over and over and over again. And instead of helping the horse heal, it actually starts to create this strong immune systemic response, which then can cause inflammation and autoimmune issues. But if the gut barrier isn't repaired, this response becomes chronic, and instead of helping the horse heal, it actually starts causing more systemic issues. That's why gut health isn't just about absorption. It's a core piece of immune regulation, and understanding this response helps us see the bigger picture. So supporting gut barrier integrity isn't just about digestion. It's about maintaining a strong, balanced immune system as well. So let's get back to the microbiome so we kind of wrap this all in one nice package. In summary, your horse's microbiome, especially in the hindgut, plays a protective role in maintaining the gut integrity. How does the microbiome do that? The microbes actually produce these short-chain fatty acids, which nourish the cells of the gut lining and help regulate the inflammation. The diverse microbiome actually helps outcompete any harmful bacteria that can damage the lining or release any toxins. And a balanced microbiome population can support the healthy immune system, because when the microbiome becomes imbalanced or disrupted, a condition we call dysbiosis, you have the whole cascade that we just discussed above, including leaky gut and the chronic immune response, which causes an overstimulation and complete overwhelm of the body, which leads to chronic low-grade inflammation both in the gut and systemically. So again, to review, it's basically that damage to the microbiome causing a dysbiosis increases gut permeability. It allows toxins and bacterial fragments and other things to cross this gut barrier. And what happens next? You guessed it, the immune system kicks in, it goes into overdrive, it tries to attack these foreign particles, it produces antibodies to these foreign particles, and it increases inflammatory chemicals in response to all of this going on. So what happens then is the horse's digestive system is caught in a loop. You have dysbiosis causes damage to the gut lining, and then you have the damaged gut lining allows for foreign particles into the bloodstream. And then the immune system reacts aggressively, and then chronic inflammation keeps weakening the barrier, and the cycle repeats. So you see how important the first part is, which is how we manage our horses and what we feed them to help prevent dysbiosis and leaky gut, and the immune reaction and the chronic inflammation is so important. And it's also really important to note that the dysregulated microbiome can actually alter the metabolism of nutrients. So it actually can affect what your horse is able to absorb, what your horse is able to get out of what you feed them. And that can affect the mood and behavior through the gut-brain axis. So what happens when this whole cascade and the horse gets caught in the loop? What does this look like? So you might start seeing symptoms that aren't related to the gut, like chronic skin issues or hives, behavioral changes like irritability or spookiness. You can have muscle tension or unexplained soreness. That's just due to the chronic inflammation. You can have poor performance or stamina issues, where the horse just isn't quite right anymore. Of course, you can have digestive complaints, including things like frequent colic or chronic diarrhea. And then we get into it creating metabolic issues, laminitic issues, contributing to insulin resistance, and just setting the horse up for long-term metabolic dysfunction. And these nutrient imbalances that happen because of the poor digestive function, once the digestive system is damaged like this, can also lead to things like tendon and ligament weakening. So a lot of times we'll look at this list and we'll say, hey, this points to a gut that's under stress and a microbiome that's no longer working in balance. So what do we take away from this? The microbiome is the foundation of gut health. And how we feed the horse, how we manage the horse, is super important to that microbial diversity and balance. Without the microbiome foundation being strong, we are not going to be able to fully heal leaky gut, regulate the immune response, or maintain a resilient digestive system. So what's the takeaway? So what can you do as a horse owner? So we realize that supporting the gut lining and the microbiome means that we're thinking long-term and we're actually thinking proactively and preventatively. So here are some guidelines to follow in order to do this. Number one, you're going to prioritize forage-based diets with a consistent fiber intake. That's super important to this hindgut fermentation and the hindgut microbial balance. You're going to limit or eliminate unnecessary grain and high-starch feeds. So as a side note here, and hopefully this is not a common practice that you've heard of, but sometimes I've seen when working horses on the track that if they are not eating their grain or they're a little bit heavy, that they'll actually withhold hay from the horses. And that is to encourage them to eat their grain, but also limit their intake of food. And you can see from everything that we have covered so far how damaging this practice could be with a horse on so many levels. Not only does the high grain diet the exact opposite of what is recommended for top health, but the low forage part of it is really damaging. And not just to the digestive system, but as we've covered today, for the whole body. So the third recommendation is to make feed changes gradually. So if you want to switch your grain or you're going for a new hay delivery, that you want to do this change over at least a 7 to 10 day period that allows the microbiome to adjust to the changes. Number 4, you're going to minimize stress and support with adaptogens or herbs when needed. That will help modulate the effects that could be damaging to their system. Number 5 is you can use targeted probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics to help encourage microbial diversity. And number 5, you can always support the gut lining with both supplements and herbs to help keep the integrity of the gut lining the best that it can be. And most importantly, perhaps, is that you need to tune into your horse. You have to look for the subtle changes, the changes in the mood, the changes in movement, or the appetite, or even the manure. That is often your first clue that something is not quite right. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion on the microbiome. We're going to be talking more about this subject. We're going to be talking more about nutrition. Of course, we're going to be talking about ulcers. And this is going to be a launching point because functional nutritional medicine for horses can be a great way to actually treat things that are going wrong in your horse, that actually look at nutrition as medicine and not just as food. And that's where we'll be going in the coming weeks and coming months here at Hale and Hearty Horses. I'll see you guys in the next podcast.